Glory Cloud Podcast, episode 186. Well, stay tuned for Song of Songs this week. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Glory Cloud Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Kahi. I am not joined by our co-host, Todd Bordeaux, this week, but I am joined by our special guest, Miles Van Pelt. Welcome, Miles.
Thanks, Chris. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
I would sing your praises and tell your resume for our listeners, but I'm going to let you do that. Would you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're on a podcast about Meredith Kline's writing in theology?
Okay. I don't know how much detail you want. I grew up in Southern California in the 70s and 80s. Went to Azusa Pacific University to get my undergraduate degree. I got it in biblical literature. Studied with a guy named John Hartley for Old Testament and Bill Mounts for New Testament, if you're familiar with that name.
You studied with Bill Mounts?
Yeah, he was my Greek teacher.
Wow.
Yeah, and he also taught, I took Romans and Galatians with him and Prison and Pastoral Epistles. He was the one who taught me how to teach languages. And so it was really great. I'd had Hebrew the year before, and it was an older system, wasn't a very good system. And Bill had just been writing this grammar. It was the year before it was going to be published. And so we went through the grammar, and I just loved how he taught the language. And so it's really what gave me the opportunity to write basics of biblical Hebrew in the same vein. So, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's providentially, it was a great relationship. Bill and I are still friends doing things together. Then I went to seminary at a place called Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in South Hamilton, Massachusetts. Arrived there in the summer of 1992. Got there early because they said if I came early, I could take 2 classes for free. So I was going to take this class called Exegesis in the Prophetic Books with a guy named Meredith Kline. Never heard of him before. In California, I was a Baptist, an Arminian, dispensational, member of Saddleback Church, if you're familiar with that.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yeah, married and baptized in the context of that church. And 6 months later, I was Orthodox Presbyterian and a member in good standing. You can imagine, Meredith Kline changed the way I thought about the Bible in so many ways. He's impacted me in countless ways. In fact, his book, The Structure of Biblical Authority, especially the chapter on the canonical or the covenantal nature of the status of the canon and the Old Testament origins of the gospel genre, helped me to put the Bible back together again in terms of what had been taken apart over the years of different education. So I'm really thankful for that book. After Gordon Conwell, I taught at Gordon College for a while, started a PhD program overseas, but we had to come back for family reasons. Started all over again at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and studied there under Peter Gentry, doing a PhD in Hebrew, focusing in Hebrew. I was there from 2000 to 2003, finished my coursework, took my comprehensive exams, packed up, and moved here because RTS crazily offered me a job. And so I thought, before they know that they've made a mistake, I better get down there and start teaching. So I've been here 17 years. This is my 18th year teaching at Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi. I love it here. I love the people I get to work with. I love my students. I love teaching the languages and Old Testament biblical theology. So it's great. I've served as the academic dean here for 14 years, which is a crazy long time. And we started something called the Summer Institute of Biblical Languages, where every summer we teach intensively Hebrew and Greek, both Hebrew 1 and 2 and Greek 1 and 2. It's 8 weeks, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, and we go through the whole system. And we have people really who come from all over the world and take those courses because they can do it intensively. So sometimes missionaries or people just interested can take off time from work and do sabbaticals and come and get those languages. So we have a really great time. People have gotten met and married in that context. And so it's been a great time. If you're doing the MDiv curriculum here in Jackson, it's your first class, Hebrew 1 and 2. And so it's like boot camp. Everyone becomes quick friends and really friends for their whole rest of their seminary career. It's a great environment.
That's great. Well, we really appreciate your willingness to come on the Glory Cloud podcast and talk to us today. Before we dive right into our material, I will tell our listeners, I should have said this right up front, but better late than never. Stay tuned after the music at the very end for an important announcement. That's all I'll say about that. But let's get back to why we're here today, Miles. Some people would consider this a hot potato, but would you talk to us about the Song of Songs, how it's been interpreted, maybe a bit about authorship and where conservative scholars stand on the issues today?
No other book in the Old Testament has suffered at the hands of different interpretations like the Song of Songs. I mean, it really has been, there are so many different angles, and every angle kind of will affect how you translate certain texts because of the metaphorical nature of the language, and then how you contextualize and apply it. So, there are extremes. There's kind of, because of the topic, sex and sexuality and marriage, however you construe it, it can be sensitive to some people and in some cultures. And so how do you deal with that? How is this, the best song ever? And how does it relate to Christ? And how does it relate to the New Testament and the church and stuff like that? So there are interpretations that range from allegorical. So this is one of the oldest ones. So, the man and the woman are really Yahweh and Israel, and the relationship they have with each other, which of course there is warrant for that. For example, in Ezekiel 16 or Hosea 1-3, we see that the covenant of marriage is oftentimes used by the Lord to describe his covenant that he has with Israel in that same relationship. And in the New Testament, that would apply to Christ, Jesus and the church. So either Yahweh and Israel or Jesus and the church. And of course, Ephesians 5, 31 and 32 would make that point as well when Paul says this is a profound mystery, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church, where he quotes Genesis 2:24 and says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. So those are kind of the allegorical interpretations. In that same vein, some people think that it's a veiled description of the history of Israel. It's kind of a redemptive historical approach. So when the man comes out of the wilderness, it's Israel coming out of the wilderness, or the bride comes out of the wilderness, those types of things. There are interpretations that it is a kind of a series of marriage songs, so celebrating marriage. There's one, the funerary or the funeral cultic one, where they was used in cultic settings and funerals to promote the hope of life. At the end, for example, it says, love is strong as death, fierce as the grave. So I think, maybe there's a kind of a funeral kind of cultic song. Then there are the kind of the more, I don't want to say literal, but more natural interpretations where it's actually about kind of love between a man and a woman. Some people see two characters there, Solomon and a bride, or maybe an idealized king and a bride, like king and queen for a day, if you're the married couple. Some people see it as unconnected songs, kind of loosely arranged and just to celebrate love because it's something God made. Some people see it as a unified song. Some people say two people in the song. Some people say three people in the song, that there's two men and the woman has to make a choice. So there's all kinds of different interpretations that stem from it. And really, some of that does relate to the issue of authorship. What we do know is that in the book, the one person named is Solomon. His name appears several times. His court, his wealth, his knowledge of flora and fauna, it just runs through the book. And then there's the Shulamite, the maiden. Now the Shulamite is not necessarily a name, but it means one who belongs to Solomon. But there also is perhaps this, some people argue that there's a third person. There's a male figure in there that's not Solomon. And so he's in competition, I guess you can say, with Solomon. And then there are the daughters of Jerusalem. So you've got the maiden, Solomon, maybe another male figure, and then the daughters of Jerusalem in the context of this song. So it's difficult. Part of the difficulty is there are no headings or paragraph markers or punctuation or anything that in the song itself, like we have in our modern Bibles, that would allow us to make some decisions. And so once you make a decision, you have to go back and re-engineer the book to make sense out of it. So it does challenge interpreters. I teach a course on the Song of Songs every other year, and I've done it for about 12 years. And the first several years, I would just pick an interpretation and run it through the whole text and see if I could make it work. And so I did that with redemptive historical, 2-person, 3rd-person, 3-person, some allegorical stuff. And I found the 3-person view to be the best view. In fact, I was introduced to that view by Walt Kaiser.
Okay.
At Gordon Conwell. He came there from TEDS to teach, and I ended up providentially becoming his teaching assistant when he first arrived. And so for a couple of years there, and so I got to work with him, and he turned me on to this view, the view he held. And he actually published an essay called, True Marital Love in Proverbs and the Interpretation of the Song of Songs, The Way of Wisdom, Essays in Honor of Bruce Waltke. So Zondervan 2000, and he uses Proverbs 5 and Proverbs 7, which has language in it just like the Song of Songs, to help interpret or unlock the Song of Songs, because there you have a young male figure being enticed by 2 women, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly, with the same type of language. And in that context, the author is arguing for the young man, or trying to persuade him to choose the right mate, not Lady Folly but Lady Wisdom. And so Kaiser said this makes great sense because Song of Songs is a wisdom composition, and so maybe there's something going on here. And so that's where I first got turned on to this idea.
Okay, so you've already talked about the 2-character and the 3-character approach. Is there anything else that you want to say about why you're convinced about the 3-character approach?
At least currently persuaded. Well, let me do this. Let me tell you what I think is the message of the Song of Songs.
Okay.
And then show you how I think at the end, the woman rejects Solomon and leaves with her beloved shepherd boy, we can say. Sometimes the shepherd imagery in the song for this other man, they call it the shepherd interpretation, the shepherd hypothesis. Some people too have called it the dramatic interpretation, like there's a big drama going on, there's a chorus and singers, but I find no evidence of drama or chorus or operatic singers or anything like that in the book. I think people are just trying to figure out what the heck to do with this book, and they're trying to, different options and trying on different things. So here's the message of the book. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
And I get this so it's wisdom literature, so you have to always go to the end, right? You always find the answer at the end, then you have to go back and reread it. And so it forces you to read and reread. And so the message of the book appears in Song of Songs, chapter 8, verses 6 through 10. This is the final section of the song, chapter 8, beginning in verse 5, when the woman comes out of the wilderness with her beloved, and she puts instruction before us regarding the nature of her decision and what she's experienced. And she says, I'll read it, 8, 6 through 10, real quick, and then I'll summarize its instruction. So here's what it says. The woman is speaking here. Place me like the seal on your heart, like the seal on your arm. For love is strong like death, obstinate like the grave with zeal. Its flames are flames of fire, the very flame of Yahweh, or you could translate that, the hottest possible flame. Many waters cannot extinguish love, and rivers cannot flood it. If a man gave all the wealth of his house for love, it would utterly scorn him. I am a wall, and my breasts are like towers. And so in this way, I've become in his eyes like one who brings forth or finds wholeness or peace. So I skipped a little bit there. Okay, so that's the section. And here's how it goes. The commitment of marriage should be rock solid. The intimacy of marriage should be white hot. If you can sustain a rock solid and white hot marriage, this type of love endures hardship, resists temptation, and promotes satisfaction and wholeness. So the covenant of marriage should be both rock solid in terms of commitment and white hot in terms of sexual intimacy. This type of love endures hardship, resists temptation, and promotes wholeness. That's what I think the message of the book is. And it's a great message because in some sense, it's critical of both of the world and the church, right? The church loves rock solid commitment, but they do very little to promote kind of the white hot intimacy. Now the world loves the white hot intimacy, but it kind of scorns the rock solid commitment. And so it's when you keep both of these things together that you protect and fuel the marriage. And so I just use, my students know rock solid and white hot go together. And the rock solid commitment allows for more white hot, and the white hot commitment allows for more rock solid marriage. And so they kind of work together like that. And so it says so the commitment of marriage should be rock solid. So place me like a seal on your heart, like a seal on your arm. So seals back in those days, they said, this is ownership. You can't open it. It belongs to me. Obstinate like the grave, or strong like death, that it's irreversible. It's something that God has done and shouldn't be undone by man. So rock solid. Then it says its flames are flames of fire, the very flame of Yahweh, so the hottest possible flame. The word there for flame is actually lightning strike. And we know that lightning is like 100 times or 1,000 times hotter than the sun. So it's the hottest possible flame. And all of that heat is definitely referring back to all of the sexual imagery that appears throughout the book. Okay. And then it says many waters cannot extinguish love, and rivers cannot flood it, so it endures hardship. If a man were to give all the wealth of his house for love, it would utterly scorn him. Resist temptation, right? You can't buy love. And then it says, I am a wall, and my breasts are like towers. And so, and that's right after the statement about the sister, which means she has kept herself. I am a wall, and my breasts are like towers. And so in this way, I've become in his eyes like one who brings forth or finds wholeness. The word shalom there. Okay. Now, right after that, it talks about, in chapter 8, it talks about Solomon and his vineyard. Okay. Now, the woman has a vineyard, it's her body, and Solomon has a vineyard in the song, and it's his harem. Okay. And it says here in verse 11, Solomon had a harem, or Solomon had a harem in Baal Hamon. Okay. He gave the vineyard to its keepers, or those would have been the eunuchs. And each man would bring forth its fruit, 1,000 pieces of silver for each woman. My vineyard, which belongs to me, is still before me. The 1,000 pieces of silver are for you, Solomon, so keep your money. And the 200 for the keepers, for its fruit, you can keep that too. And so she rejects Solomon at the very end here and goes off with the other guy. So that's my interpretation. That's kind of where it is. So the woman is presented with two options. She can have life with luxury and ease and opulence as a concubine in the harem of Solomon. You can imagine back in the day, Solomon was the richest, smartest, wealthiest dude of all time. And it would have been like living a palatial palace life in an ancient world where death and disease and famine and starvation were very common. Or she could live kind of the Genesis 2 ideal of married to one man in a relationship like that. And she chooses the Genesis 2 ideal over kind of the paradise of what would be Solomon's harem. So two different offers, the way of wisdom and the way of folly. And the woman at the end chooses, I think, wisdom.
That's incredible. I like that.
Yeah, it works because, wisdom literature helps people make decisions, right? Mm-hmm. It's how does God's world work, according to his word. And so he's the guy who built marriage. And so in this wisdom composition, he sets forth instructions for how it works in the context of a fallen world when you are apt to make poor and unwise decisions. So that's what I think is going on there. Now, so if you do that, you read back into it from the beginning on, and you can see in the book, there are 4 different sections, all right? They run from chapter 1, verse 2 to 2:7, chapter 2, 8 to 3:5, 3:6 to 8:4, and then 8:5 to 14. And the first section is the temptation of the harem. So the woman has been taken into the harem, and she's having a discussion with harem attendants, and they're saying, Solomon is famous for lovemaking. You're going to be great. We're going to decorate and beautify you. And she says, no, all right, I'm dark but lovely. I've had to do manual labor. I'm not suited for this kind of life. And they say, don't worry, we'll fix it all, right? Now, harem life is interesting. We don't know much about Solomon's harem, but in Esther chapter 2, we get a very thorough description of harem life. There are 2 parts to the harem. There are the virgins in training section, and then where all the queens and concubine lives after you've been with the king. And the harem training part, it's called the House of the Women. They have 1 year of beautification treatments. So it's 6 months with like oils and perfumes, and then 6 months with lotions, and then instruction in how to make love to the king and what you take with yourself and what you wear and how you decorate yourself like that. So a year of preparation. Now, Solomon was the greatest king of that era. And so you can imagine if we see that in Esther 2, what we see here in the Song of Songs could have been even more so. We also know that the woman is in the context of a harem because we have the statement, where is the statement? In 6:8, where Solomon is trying to woo the woman. He's trying to give his best line to her. He says, 60 queens there are and 80 concubines and virgins without number, but you're the best, my beloved. One of the oldest lines in the book, right? And so we can see that. Yeah, we can see in that context. Yeah, there is that's the harem right there. 60 queens, 80 concubines, and virgins without number. And it must have been in Solomon's younger days because we know by 1 Kings 11, he had 700 queens and 300 concubines.
Wow.
Yeah. And what happened there says, and this was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Mm-hmm. That's the statement of that. And so we know that. And so it looks like Solomon writing himself or someone writing about Solomon is critiquing that particular lifestyle because it's what tore the kingdom. Remember, Solomon's wives led his heart astray into idolatry, and it's what tore the kingdom in half. Mm-hmm. And it was only because of David that the Lord didn't take the whole kingdom away from him. So that's how bad it was. So in the first section, in 1:2 to 2:7, the woman is in the harem and she's being kind of trained to be a concubine. Then that section ends with an adjuration, right? Do not arouse or awaken love before it is ready. Do you know that? Yeah. And what that actually is, that adjuration occurs 3 times in the book, and it marks the end of the first, second, and third sections. Okay. And then in each section after that, someone comes. Okay. So at the end of the harem scene, at the beginning, it says, do not arouse or awaken love until it's ready or before it delights. And that's actually a curse. In Hebrew, it's actually, if you arouse or awaken love before it's ready, may you be cursed. And they just leave the curse thing out because of language taboo. You never say the curse part. And so the way we make it in English is you just turn it into a negative statement. So then, therefore, do not arouse or awaken love. But it really is a curse. And so it's stronger in Hebrew than it is in English. Does that make sense? Wow. So it really should be taken as, if you arouse or awaken love before it's ready, may you be cursed. Because, right, they're trying to provoke her into loving Solomon, and she doesn't want to love this guy. Then in 2:8, a male figure comes leaping and bounding over the hills and the mountains. All right. And this guy does not have access to the woman. He's at this wall. He can only peer through the windows and the lattice and call over the wall with his voice. And he says, hey, it's springtime. Get out of there. Come be with me. And she said, I can't get out. You'll have to go and wait. And so he goes away and waits until she can get out, and she gets him. That section also ends with the same adjuration. Therefore, do not arouse or awaken love, or if you arouse or awaken love, may you be cursed. And someone else comes. And this time it's Solomon who comes with his kind of portable love tent and 60 warrior eunuchs with him. And they march right into the harem. And it's almost described like it's like billowing clouds of perfume and incense and all this kind of business coming, pomp and circumstance. And there are these warrior eunuchs around him. And they all say, the translations say, all with their hand on their sword are ready for battle. But the word is actually all who have been seized by the sword. That has been made eunuchs for the harem. Because you wouldn't bring 60 warriors into the king's harem who were not eunuchs. They would have all been put to death probably. And so that begins the third section, and it's the longest section in the book. And it's basically a series or cycles of Solomon trying to woo the woman rejecting Solomon's wooing, the daughters of Jerusalem trying to get the woman to do it, and then her rejecting that. And then at the end, the daughters of Jerusalem saying, hey, how is your beloved better than any other beloved, especially like Samson? And why should we go look for him? And then there's the adjuration at the end again, and then the woman comes. So in 2:8, a man comes who does not have access to the harem. And then in 3:6, Solomon comes and has full access to the harem. So in the context of the song, there are definitely 2 different men, it appears to be. And then when you place that with the very end in chapter 8, when the woman says, keep your money, right? My vineyard belongs to me and I've kept it. So that's kind of how the three-person interpretation works in that particular context.
Wow, that's really compelling. More compelling than some of the questions that I had written down as I read through it in preparation for this episode. So I appreciate you laying that out. One of the questions I had as I was reading through it is, what's going on with the watchmen who appear a few times in the book? The first time they're mentioned, they seem kind of benign, but the second time they're mentioned, they seem like antagonists.
Yeah. So both of the watchmen appear in dream accounts.
Okay.
Right. And so there are two dream accounts, and the one in chapter 5 is really famous. So each time when the beloved goes away, or she doesn't have access to the beloved, she has these dreams and longs to be with him. And that's where some of the most erotic language appears in the book, because she wants to be united with him, because once she's united to him, it can't be undone, right? Once she becomes an unvirgin, she'll no longer be with the king. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. And so she's longing for that status, for her to get out, to be with her man. And so the watchmen represent the fact that she's been kind of trapped or into the harem, kind of like sentenced to harem life, and unwillingly at this point. And so the watchmen are those who watch out or protect that. And so it says, like in the dream account, like she's walking about in the streets and they beat her up and stuff like that. A woman, and so this is definitely a dream, because a woman in the harem would never be allowed to go out at night and walk in the streets. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And so the watchmen just represent the fact that she's been, you could say, abducted into Solomon's harem, and they're not letting her out.
Okay, that's hopeful. Is there any special significance to the fact that frankincense and myrrh are the spices and perfumes that are mentioned?
Yeah, there are a lot more that are mentioned too. I don't know. They're just valuable. Throughout the book, there are plants and trees and orchards and vineyards and fruit and spices and fabric and gold and silver. It's very much painted in the context of an Eden kind of environment, right? So a lot of the language has garden imagery involved in it. And we know that Solomon was a serious trader in all of that stuff. So it aptly describes his kind of commercial trade and stuff like that, all the stuff he would have had. If you read kind of in, where is it? I have this written down at the beginning here. Where it comes, right. Right, yeah, so like it says in 1 Kings 4, Solomon was wiser than any other man, including Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. And his fame spread to all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He described plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He also taught about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. Men of all nations came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who heard of his wisdom. So he was just a purveyor of this stuff. And so I think the fact that gold, frankincense, and myrrh appear in there, yeah, I don't know
okay.
if it's related to the three wise men, but you can see it's the three wise men. The wisdom tradition trades in that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is why, like, I guess, so the three-person interpretation then begs the question, then who wrote the book? Right? Because did Solomon write critically of himself or did someone write critically about him? So the very first verse has a superscription in it where it says the Song of Songs, or the best song ever. And then it says, which is to, for, or by Solomon, Leshlomo. So that lamed preposition normally indicates something like authorship, right? So in the Psalms, when you have Le David, that's by David. And Psalm 72 and 127 both have Leshlomo, and indicating that Solomon wrote Psalm 72 and 127. So that seems to be some evidence that it could be Solomon who wrote it. He's the only person named in the song, right? Also, on 5 occasions, the male figure is identified as the king. In 2 of those, it's specifically Solomon. The song also mentions the king's bed, his chambers, royal guard, carriage, crown, harem, and vineyard, right? Other connections with Solomon include the chariots of Pharaoh, the Tower of David, and location in Jerusalem. Additionally, like the frequent mention of spices, perfumes, wealth, flora in the song correspond with Solomon's kingdom endeavors. We know he was a gifted and prolific writer of poetic and wisdom literature. It is recorded that God granted wisdom to such a degree that he surpassed all who came before him. So he wrote songs and proverbs. We also know in Ecclesiastes 2, whether Solomon wrote that or whether someone wrote it about Solomon, it says that the guy who was testing life in chapter 2 with all different things, wine, women, and song, even in the midst of that, he kept his wisdom. So it could be, and probably, tradition has it that Solomon wrote it. Kline thinks Solomon wrote it. In his article that I mentioned here, Kline we should mention this. In 1959, Meredith Kline wrote an essay for Christianity Today on the Song of Songs, its interpretation. And you can still get that, and we'll post it on the show notes, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. And he does a good job rehearsing the history of its interpretation. And he prefers, at the end of the day, the natural interpretation that there are two people there. And it's just an idealized Solomon and a woman. So, and that interpretation is still prevalent among modern evangelicals take a variety of views. Some still allegorical, some still literal or natural, 2-person, 3-person. Some that the song is a unified composition, like Dwayne Garrett recently, and some that it's like, and Trimper Longman thinks it's just a random number of poems about the goodness of love and love making. Meredith Kline, I love the last paragraph of his essay. I'll read it really quick. He says, "The song confronts us with love as it was in the beginning, and it lets us hear again the divine marriage benediction, first addressed to the lover and his beloved in man's primeval home. What the incarnate word did for the sanctity of marriage by his presence at the Cana wedding, the written word does by dwelling with joy upon conjugal love in the Song of Songs." Wow. So, and there's a reason for that, and I see Kline's point. It's because marriage, the importance of marriage in the creation account. We know Dr. Kline loved Genesis 1-3 and got every ounce of interpretational fortitude out of that he could. Well, consider this. God creates in Genesis chapter 1 by division. The verb bara means to create by division. So divide light from darkness, the heavens from the earth, the waters above, the waters below, that kind of business. And even the creation of the woman, right, is created by division. And when the woman is created, the man and the woman enter into a marriage covenant where what has been divided now becomes one flesh. And so in some sense, that's the first thing that comes back together in the creation account. That's why we call it consummation. And it points to, actually, the greater consummation in Revelation 21 and 22, where there's another marriage covenant, right? So the marriage of Genesis 2 points to the marriage of Revelation 19 and 21 for sure. And then Ephesians 5:31 and 32 connect the dots there for us. And so we know that. But think about this. In Genesis chapter 2, on day 6, it says something shocking. It says that it's not good that man should be alone. In Genesis chapter 1, everything is good, and day 6 is very good. So when we're on day 6 in Genesis chapter 2, rehearsing those events, and it says it's not good, that should shock readers to pay attention, because we know at the end it's got to be very good. And the question is, what takes it from not good to very good? It's not the man, it's not the garden, it's not the animals. It's the creation of the woman and the marriage covenant that moves it from not good to very good. And so marriage is a pre-fall institution. It's not something that human culture society invented to cope with the fall. It's the substructure, the fabric of this created world. It's how we fulfill the dominion mandate to rule, and to fill. And we see that the corruption of the marriage covenant always provokes judgment. So, right, you can think of right before the flood, there's the sons of God and the daughters of man in some kind of weird marriage relationship that corrupts the world and therefore enters into judgment. Sodom and Gomorrah, corrupt marriage covenant issues, judgment, right? You can even see it at the end of the book of Judges in Judges 19, where the Benjaminites rape the concubine to death, and then they have to wage holy war against that tribe to purge the evil from the midst. So the importance of the marriage covenant throughout the Bible is vitally important. And so that's why there's so much literature devoted to it. You think of Proverbs 5, Proverbs 7, in fact, Proverbs 31, right? If you think that let's see, wisdom literature is rooted in creation. The climax of creation is the creation of the woman in the marriage covenant. So the climax of wisdom in Proverbs 31 is get a good wife, right? And so you get this outline of the wife of valor in Proverbs 31. And then the only woman ever called that in the Bible is Ruth, right? And in the Hebrew Bible order, Proverbs 31 comes right before the book of Ruth. And then you've got the Song of Songs right after that. So you've got Proverbs 31. Here's how a man should consider a woman. You've got the book of Ruth, where you've got Ruth and Boaz, who are the woman of virtue and the man of virtue. And then you've got Song of Songs, which says, now if you're a woman, here's the way in which you make a choice. Does that make sense? So they work together in the canon like that.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think the canonical context is really important for understanding the song. There's a lot about marriage, and Kline is right. Marriage is so important. It's what produces family and culture.
Right.
Right. And it's the metaphor, the covenant nature of marriage points to the new heavens and the new earth and the relationship that Jesus will have with his church. And so when we corrupt it here on earth, we're corrupting the image of hope that we have eschatologically.
Wow. Well, that really answers the question of how to situate the Song of Songs in covenant history.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's really involved in a biblical theology of marriage, it sounds like.
That's exactly right. And so understanding that biblical theology of marriage is very, very important. In fact, I wrote an essay on the Song of Songs in kind of an RTS collaborative project called the Biblical Theological Introduction to the Old Testament. We're going to post that on the show notes too. And, the New Testament upholds the value of marriage, upholds the value of sexual intimacy in a number of different ways. And, for example, the New Testament, both the Song of Songs and the New Testament affirm and promote marriage as an exclusive covenantal relationship between one man and one woman. Additionally, the New Testament also affirms that the marriage relationship should be both rock solid and white hot. So 1 Corinthians 7, Hebrews 13, 14. And that together these realities protect and sustain the marriage relationship. It's important to understand also that the New Testament does not deny or diminish the importance of our physical bodies, right? In fact, the bodily resurrection of Jesus affirms their importance. Our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. And so we are taught to flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. So from 1 Corinthians 6. For this reason, the wisdom of the New Testament demands that a Christian must not marry a non-Christian because of that unequally yoked capacity. How can light have fellowship with darkness? So it's also, this covenantal symbolism is intentional, I say typological, and rooted in the earliest parts of Scripture. I say it's no accident that the creation account in Genesis 2 climaxes on day 6 for the creation of the woman, because it points to the eschatological marriage that we're to anticipate later. So the goodness and the joy of marriage and sexual intimacy anticipate the satisfaction, fulfillment, and the wholeness that's coming in the coming kingdom. In this way, the wisdom of the song is not limited to the realities of this fallen world, nor does it instructions apply only to those engaged or married. As wisdom literature, it can make us a wise for salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. So you don't have to be married or engaged to enjoy the book, because every longing and desire will be imperfectly experienced in this world. It will only be perfectly experienced in the world to come. And so the single person, the divorced person, a person who has experienced death with a spouse, right, knows that longing for intimacy that they don't have. And it shouldn't cause them to despair. It actually should cause them to hope more fully in the satisfaction that's coming, because it is the promise that's coming. And it's also good too when we think about people. People enjoy sexual intimacy. People enjoy that connection, and people enjoy the heat, right? And that's a good thing. God created it because he wants us to know that it's coming to even more in the new heavens and the new earth, and he's going to be the one who satisfies his people with that.
Amen.
Yeah.
So, that good part of creation tells us something about what heaven is going to be like.
Yeah. And the fact that we can never be fully satisfied reminds us that we weren't really created for this world, that we really still are indeed aliens and strangers on this earth. But there is satisfaction coming. At his right hand are pleasures forevermore. And we're headed that way. And the Song of Song highlights and celebrates all those things. And so some people ask me all the time, like, would you take a literal approach or an allegorical approach? And I like to say, well, it's both natural and typological or eschatological. So yes, it's about marriage and about sex and about making right decisions and about what happens if you choose foolishly and what happens if you choose wisely. And so it promotes wise choices, and it celebrates the goodness of marriage and the fact that it can sustain marriage and help you maintain a strong marriage. But also, our human marriages are pictures of an eschatological marriage that's coming. And so that's why it's good for Christians to have good marriages, because the unbelieving world can look and say, wow, there's something different about them. I wonder what that would be like.
Right.
So good marriage can be an evangelical device, an evangelistic device. Yeah.
Exactly. I appreciate the point you just made about how you respond when people ask you that. Maybe you can just say a few things about how the interpretation can go off the rails if you take only a natural, like this is a manual approach, or only an allegorical approach to the book.
Yeah. So some people approach it like it's ancient Near Eastern Viagra, right? like they really like, it's just, it helps you feel unashamed to talk about it, and it celebrates love. So it says it's good. And so you can do all this. And some, I've heard some preachers preach through it, and it's like, I won't mention names, but they just treat it as if it's a how-to manual, like how often and how to, and it misses the fact that our bodies created as God's temples, and how we treat those temples and what we experience as those temples, right, has meaning beyond itself, right? And then if you're only allegorical, right, then you just play down the true significance of the marriage covenant and marriage itself. So I think it's holding those things together. For example, Bernard of Clairvaux, he's famous for having preached 86 sermons on the Song of Songs, just chapters 1 through 3. I have them here on my desk in 4 volumes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But it's all allegorical. And the problem with allegory is that there's no controls on it, right? So the woman's breasts are twin fawns, and therefore that's the Old and the New Testament, right? And it's the desire of the man and stuff like that. Or what else could you make of it? There's no end to it, and it doesn't appreciate the gift of marriage and the gift of our bodies, and the fact that our bodies are going to be redeemed and renewed and glorified. And so all of our desires, our capacity to experience satisfaction will increase as our desires increase as well. So I think it's holding those two things together that give you kind of, we're aliens and strangers on this world, but we still live in this world.
Amen.
We eat, we drink, we sleep, we have children, but all of these things are a shadow of what's to come. This world is the shadow, right? The next world that comes is where the invisible and the visible unite,
right? And
the fullness of reality comes. So I like that, because in the marriage covenant, 2 people become one, and so it's a picture, right? And so the woman was created out of the man's body, and then in marriage they reunite. And so this world was created by division, the visible from the invisible in Genesis chapter 1:1, but we're anticipating that same reunion in the new heavens and new earth. So the consummation of the marriage in Genesis chapter 2 points to the consummation of the new heavens and new earth in Genesis chapter 21:22. So I think that's the way to look at it. So there's so much in there, both naturally for the world that we live in now and the fallen world, because remember, the woman is given 2 options, Solomon and her true love, and for the world to come. So, because there really are strong desires. I mean, the woman is using in the song longing for sexual union with her husband, or with her man, or her fiance or whatever, to resist temptation with Solomon. So, because, back in the, if we even know this from the account of Esther, Esther could have spent one night with the king and never seen him again, but she would have been a member of that harem the rest of her life.
Right.
Right. That's a life of substantial loneliness when it comes to a covenant partner. And so the woman is choosing not to be that way. Right. She's choosing companionship over wealth,
mm-hmm.
and all that would represent in Solomon's court.
Wow. That's incredible. It's helpful. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about with regard to Song of Songs?
There are all kinds of things. I mean, I guess one you could just, it's a great book. I think I'd love to see people preaching and teaching from it more often, because there is a crisis in our culture when it comes to sex, sexuality, gender
Mm.
identity, and so a book like this can help address some of that. It can one of the reasons I think that we're kind of in a crisis of sex, sexuality, gender identification is because everyone's realizing like marriage isn't satisfying and long-term relationships aren't satisfying, and I don't know how to act or behave, or who I love or who I don't love. And the church needs to stand up and say, that's right, it's broken, we've wrecked it. But there are wise ways to conduct yourself that will promote wholeness and satisfaction and protect you from pain and heartache and stuff like that. And so we can embrace that. The church should have a good, robust theology of sex, sexuality, and intimacy, and promote that. One example is like, I talk about the marriage covenant being like a furnace, and sexual intimacy being the heat inside that furnace, the fire. And as long as that furnace is intact and that heat, that flame is going, the flame gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and it's safe in there. But you take that flame out of the furnace, and it'll either burn those around it or eventually just go out. And so everyone's taking the flame out of the furnace, the flame's going out, and people are wondering why it doesn't work anymore. And so I think the church can stand up and talk to some of these things in a more aggressive way, because we've got, the Lord invented sex, right? And here he's talking about it. So, I like to read the instruction manual to know how things work best. So I really think it's worth it. I mean, the New Testament affirms marriage. It affirms, the wife's body does not belong to her, but to the husband, and the husband's body does not belong to him, but to the wife. So there's that one flesh relationship. It says, don't, abstain from sexual intimacy for too long, except for prayer, and then get back together again. Why? Because the devil will tempt you, and you don't be tempted. So I think it's worth taking a look at. I think the view is worth taking a look at, and giving it a try. You have to kind of read through the book. So I am working on a commentary on it, but that's going to be a couple of years away. So you're going to need help faster than that.
Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that perspective. It seems to me close to how I think about just, people describe us as being in a post-Christian culture. And
right.
So many people lament and bemoan that, but I think I look at it as what a wonderful opportunity. So many people are going to be able to hear the message of Christianity for the first time, and it'll probably blow their minds. Whereas at least the world that I grew up in, so many of my school friends just considered themselves Christians by default because they were born in America, and
right.
It was just out there in the ether. That's not the case anymore. And I look at it as a wonderful opportunity to take the gospel to this post-Christian culture. And it sounds like you're thinking along the same lines in terms of the brokenness of the way we think about sex. The Song of Solomon can provide such a helpful perspective into that, into that void.
Because it deals with temptation, and it deals with options, and it deals with the possibility of making wrong decisions. And you could go right back to Proverbs 5 and Proverbs 7 and Proverbs 31 and do all of that. The book of Ruth, all of it deals with that kind of business. And so it really can, people out of the context of the church don't mind talking about sex. They don't want to talk about the Bible all the time, maybe, but they'll talk about sex. So you've got a topic that at least is provocative, and people will perk their ears up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when I do weddings, I always have a section in there on the Song of Songs. And I said, hey, your marriage must be both rock solid and white hot. And you've got to work together to promote both of those together. The degree to which you promote both of those you can resist temptation, endure hardship, and find some wholeness in this life, but not perfect wholeness. And so the Song of Songs, I always get people coming up after the wedding saying, what are you saying the Song of Songs teaches? And so it's a great way to engage people. It's a great way to engage people.
That's fantastic. Well, so as we wrap up here, Miles, can you tell us about anything that you're currently working on? How can people find you and follow what you're up to?
Let's see. My phone number is
right.
I don't have any social media. I have a Twitter account, but the RTS runs it for me. So here, so I don't tweet or anything.
Okay.
I'm not terribly old, but I just don't have enough time to follow social media. So, I work at RTS Jackson. I just finished a commentary on the Book of Judges.
Oh.
And I'm starting a commentary on the Book of Song of Songs. I'm always working on a book on the covenantal nature of the Christian Bible. That is, its structure is covenantal, both Old and New Testaments. What else am I working on? Just more Hebrew and Greek resources, always. So yeah. So the main thing I do is I've tried to over the last 20 years provide students with as many Greek and really Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek resources for the study of the biblical languages, because up until the last 20 years, there really wasn't much available, and students did not like to study the languages. And so I've tried to, in conjunction with people like Bill Mounts and Zondervan, build a whole host of resources for that. So that's what I mostly do in kind of my publishing time. So,
okay.
Other than that, I don't think there's any other way to contact me except you can, my email address is at the RTS website, RTS Jackson, mvanpelt@rts.edu. And people frequently, if you have questions about Song of Songs, feel free to email me.
Is there maybe a faculty page that would list things that you've done?
Yeah, there is. There is.
We can link to that.
Yeah. Or you could just look on Amazon. So my wife likes it when everyone buys those resources.
Well, Miles, I can't express my appreciation enough. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Well, I appreciate it. I've enjoyed the Glory Cloud podcast. I can't say that I've listened to them all, but I've listened to over 95% of them. I may have missed a few episodes here and there, but I really enjoy it. I was one of the last students of Meredith Kline at Gordon Conwell, and I was so thankful for that. He had such a big impact on me. And the people there at the time too, like Greg Beal and Gordon Hugenberger were there at the same time, and they really helped kind of promote and help kind of fill out that whole kind of reformed covenantal worldview, biblical theological. I mean, it was an amazing time there. I really discovered a new way to think about the Bible in its wholeness, and it's continuing to grow. It's something they started that has not stopped with me. So I'm thankful for Meredith Kline and all the stuff that you do to promote his work. So I still think I only understand about 60% of what he says, but I'm growing into it. When we were at Gordon Conwell, we were members at the same church. He taught Sunday school a couple of times, and probably 3 times while we were there. And my wife said, I think I understood 20% of what he said the first time. And then the second time we went through, she said like 40%. And the last time she said, now I finally get like 80%. So, because, when you're coming from completely different contexts, you just don't understand it. And so He was such a patient and loving teacher. So that was a great context. I'm thankful for his work, and I wish I could have time to interact with him on this particular topic.
I agree. Our stories sound very similar to me. I grew up in a non-denominational, dispensational background, and so all of the stories of the Bible were completely disconnected from each other. I mean, I had learned them all in Sunday school, but it wasn't until I sat in Meredith Kline's class that it all became one story, one piece of fabric that was all about Christ, and that was just incredible.
Yeah, when the one story thing. Yeah, growing up, for me, the Old Testament was like a lot of scary stories to make you moralistic. And, I had to be I had like a hermeneutical conversion when I got to Conwell, and it was tremendous. It was 6 months of pain and anguish. I really wrestled and struggled, and so it was a good experience for me there. So I'm thankful for the work you guys do to keep promoting that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks again, Miles.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, everyone, we would love to hear what you think about this episode. Please do email us at glorycloudpodcast@gmail.com. You can tweet at us. I am at MachenGuy. Todd is at T-Bordeaux. The podcast itself is at glorycloudpod. I'm also on Instagram as at MachenGuy. But you can also join the discussion over at the Meredith Kline Facebook group. Just let the admins know that you listen to the podcast and they can get you added. And yeah, be sure to listen to the announcement at the end of the episode. All right, Glory Cloud podcast listeners, here's the announcement. We are going to be going on hiatus for a while. I don't know how long that will be. This wasn't planned. This wasn't foreseen. It's just that some circumstances have arisen recently that mean that we aren't going to be able to do the show for a while. I know this is abrupt, and it would have been better to give you, the listeners, more warning about when the hiatus would start, but we just weren't able to do that. Everything is going to be okay because Jesus is the last Adam who has lived for us, died for us, and has risen again for us. And we hope that what you have learned from Meredith Kline helps you to rest in who Jesus is and what he has done for you. We'll let you know when we know more. So until then, we encourage you to continue to participate in the Meredith Kline Facebook group. You can still reach out on Twitter and email at glorycloudpodcast@gmail.com. But we hope that you take care and God bless you.